Elon Musk is losing a race. Not with Jeff Bezos. Bezos isn't even in the running yet. Or with Richard Branson. Virgin Galactic is also no threat to SpaceX. Elon is losing the race that all of us are running, to accomplish our life goals before our time runs out. Mr. Musk has made it his life's work to improve the survival chances of the human species. Many people have set this goal, but no one else has had the ability and the means to move us forward like he has. The most important thing is not just who first had an idea, but also who was able to make it real. Henry Ford did not invent the car. He did not, in fact, develop the idea of mass production. But he did apply these to the real world. Before Henry Ford, the average person lived and died within 30 miles of their home. There is a lot to criticize about Henry Ford, but we must credit him with making personal transportation available to almost everyone. Elon Musk has set his sights on colonizing Mars, and though he is making amazing progress, he is running out of time. Will he ever get to walk the red sands of Mars? Or will he, like Beethoven, never get to hear his finest symphony? Let's look together at how far he has come and how much farther there is to go. Hello and thanks for listening. Welcome to the Terran Space Academy, where we help prepare you for a bright future in the space industry. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and help us out on Patreon if you can. Elon Musk founded SpaceX in 2002, with the goal of establishing the Mars Oasis. Mars Oasis was an experimental greenhouse that would be landed on the surface of Mars. On the lander would be a glass dome containing carbon dioxide and other gases. This glass dome would create a greenhouse effect from the Martian sunlight. Augmented with solar electric heating, it would create enough warmth for a few plants and flowers to grow and bloom. Elon Musk planned to film this and have the video transmitted back to Earth. Mr. Musk announced that it would be the farthest that life had ever traveled. He was making an unsupported claim there, since tons of rock from Earth have been deposited on Mars over the eons. But the mistake is understandable. Elon Musk was not, at this time, a rocket engineer. He was, in fact, a software engineer. He started learning about computers at the age of 10. By the age of 12, he sold a video game he had programmed. By the age of 31, he had become a multimillionaire in the software industry. But being capable in one area of expertise doesn't make you knowledgeable about others. His possible error regarding life on Mars was one many would make. After all, he was again not a space scientist, but he was very good at solving problems, at seeing through to the fundamentals of a concept. This is a vital skill for all engineering, whether it's computer software or interplanetary rockets. To learn more about Mars, Elon joined the Mars Society, a non-profit organization led by Dr. Robert Zubrin, who is a rocket engineer and does know a lot about space and Mars. Elon started learning. He was told by those in the rocket industry that the most affordable rockets were Russian, and Russia had safely landed probes on Mars before. Russia, in fact, was the first to land a probe on Mars. That probe didn't function long, but there was no doubt they could do this. When Elon started talking price for an old Russian ICBM with enough Delta V to get the job done, he was told something reasonable. Elon flew to Russia to make the deal, but the Russians laughed at him, insulting his knowledge of space science and rocket engineering, and then quoting him a much higher price, believing he had no alternative but to pay it. Elon decided that he would build his own instead. This is a little like finding out that a surgery is expensive and deciding to get a book on it and do your own appendectomy. Very few people thought he could succeed. But Elon was not a businessman trying to understand science. He was a physicist that had succeeded at business. We often judge others and ourselves by the record of what we have done, and ignore the potential of what we could do. This judgmentalism cuts both ways. scientists and doctors often make the same mistake when dealing with entrepreneurs. Most doctors and scientists aren't good at business, not having spent time developing those skills, and they tend to underappreciate the talents required to run a successful business. Nothing gets done in space without money. The American taxpayers funded the Apollo program, but politicians aren't that interested in founding a new world, where the payoff would be decades down the road. Elon Musk went back to America without his rocket. He read this book, considered the Bible of rocket science. He didn't become the greatest rocket engineer on Earth, but he learned enough to recognize who was. He selected brilliant, creative people to build him a rocket. In 2008, just 6 years after its founding, SpaceX launched the first privately funded liquid propellant rocket to make it to orbit. Feeling the elation of this success, Elon then set his sights on something much more ambitious: expanding humanity into the solar system. SpaceX went on to become the first private company to orbit and recover a spacecraft, the first private company to send a spacecraft to the International Space Station, the first to land a booster from an orbital rocket, and the first private company to send astronauts to the International Space Station. And almost just for the fun of it, created the most powerful operational rocket since Apollo. Then finally came the Magnus Opus, creating the first fully reusable heavy-lift spaceship. Starship will make a lot of things possible, but it can't slow time. With all of SpaceX's amazing progress, things are still taking longer than planned. Elon Musk, years ago, had hoped to have a manned mission to Mars by now. But if everything goes the best possible, a Starship will fly into space on a ballistic trajectory later this year. If that goes as planned, what is the soonest we could see a viable colony on Mars? And will it be in time for Elon to see it? The year is 2021. Booster 4 and Starship 20 are getting ready to launch on a ballistic flight. This flight will not be orbital, and it shouldn't be. This is the first flight into space for the world's largest spaceship. What if it failed in orbit, coming down somewhere random? We in the medical community would call that an unfortunate outcome. The goal of this flight is to test re-entry. Starship 20 will go up out of the atmosphere and slam back down at a very high velocity. Whether it survives or not is much less important than the data that will be gained. If there are weak points in the design, find them now, not when the thing is supposed to start carrying people. I'm looking at you, Boeing. If Starship 20 fails, the design will be modified and another will be launched. If Starship 20 succeeds, the design will still be modified and another one launched. The goal is not to be perfect the first time, but to find the weaknesses in your design. How many ships can SpaceX build and test in 1 year? If they can start putting out 100 of the new version 2 engines per year, as Elon Musk has indicated is the goal, and it takes 6 Raptors for the Starship and 32 for the booster, we are looking at 2 boosters and 6 ships per year. The booster is the main limitation. Once the boosters are reliably reusable, and we aren't throwing away all those beautiful engines, we can build a lot more Starships. The next goal after ballistic Starship should be orbital Starship. We put a Starship into orbit with a commercial zero-gravity laboratory, and a really good telescope, and enough supplies for a crew of 7 to live for 8 months. Once it is safely in orbit, we can send a crew up with a Dragon capsule, leaving it docked to the Starship as a lifeboat. This first crew will begin an 8-month shakedown cruise, testing and refining life support equipment, while developing procedures and protocols for Starship operations. The crew can rotate every 8 months. This will be the world's first commercial space station. With 1 Starship undergoing orbital testing, we can use 2 others to start practicing orbital refueling. Orbital refueling is vital to any mission out of low Earth orbit. If 2021 is the start of ballistic flight and re-entry testing, 2022 should have a goal of orbital operations and refueling. But that's not all. During 2022, SpaceX should work hard on building an unmanned lunar Starship. By the end of 2022 or early 2023, a Starship can be sent to the Moon. After going into lunar orbit, this ship will launch a small communication satellite into a lunar halo orbit. This will allow us to communicate with the far side of the Moon, and is similar to what the Chinese have done for their lunar rover mission. The Starship can then test landing procedures on the Moon, seeing if it can safely land on the lunar surface. It should have a pressurized area and be crewed by humanoid robots for remote operation from Earth. It should land on the far side of the Moon with an excellent optical telescope and other research equipment. Small rocket drones should be launched from the top of the Starship, carrying wires up to 1 kilometer away in 12 different directions, creating humanity's largest radio telescope. Shielded from Earth's radio interference, it can scan the stars. This alone would make the entire mission worthwhile. This ship is never meant to carry humans, though it can have emergency supplies and serve as a refuge later. The humanoid robots should work the airlocks just as humans would. If Loon-E gets blown out a faulty airlock, we'll all be sad, but we can fix him later. Remote control rovers can be lowered by elevator, testing all this equipment before humans are near it. By the end of 2023, we should have orbital refueling down and have a successful Starship observatory on the Moon, and at least 1, if not 2, orbital Starship stations. During 2022 and 2023, SpaceX's ability to build Raptors should have increased to, hopefully, 250 a year, allowing at least 3 improved boosters and over a dozen Starships. Orbital refueling will be necessary for the initial mission to the Moon, but 2024 is the deadline to have orbital refueling completely solved, so that we can send a Starship to Mars. This should also be an uncrewed ship. This Starship should have a nuclear-powered radioisotope thermoelectric generator on board. This ship will be similar to the first Starship Lunar Observatory. It will test Mars landing safety and be staffed with semi-autonomous robots, as Mars is too far away for direct remote control. These robots will again move around the ship, doing what humans would do, while testing equipment and ship integrity. They would work the airlocks and elevator, deploying rovers and helicopters to explore. They could deploy solar panels to increase power and search for water ice under the surface. Once enough water is found and collected, it can be electrolyzed to hydrogen. The hydrogen can then be combined with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to start producing methane fuel in the Sabatier reaction, starting a reserve for future colonists. Also in 2024, if all has gone well, we could land our first crewed lunar Starship. This will immediately establish a human presence on the Moon and make a permanent base possible. This ship would land on the near side of the Moon, near the South Pole, where they can start prospecting for ice deposits. A manned mission to Mars could be accomplished by 2026, hopefully establishing a research station and evacuation point on Phobos or Deimos, then sending the rest of the crew to land near the first Starship, using the fuel produced to return to Earth when the mission is complete. If SpaceX can start flying continuous missions after 2026 with 4 ships going every 2 years, we can have an outpost on Mars with a staff of about 1,500 by 2030. The procedures and protocols should all be worked out by then, for Elon himself to safely consider the journey. Elon will then be 60 years old. Will he be too old for spaceflight by then? Let's look at this issue next lesson. Thanks for listening. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And we have Academy-themed gear at the Academy store. There are links in the description. And a special thank you to everyone supporting us on Patreon. You make it possible for us to focus on this work, and we appreciate you. Stay safe. Ad Astra Pro Terra.